All rise. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The United States District Court of the District of Kansas is now in session. The Honorable Catherine H. Braddock presiding. All persons having business before this honorable court, draw nigh and give attention to the court house state. God save these United States and this honorable court. Ladies.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Members of the jury, you will remember that when we recessed last Friday, Mr. Jameson was on the stand and we were doing cross-examination. So that's where we will pick up this morning. Sir, I would remind you that you're still under oath.
On March 10, 2008, in the afternoon, we'll talk about this in a little greater detail, you came in to this cell and you found Mr. Bruner laying on the floor of the cell. Could you describe to the jury, when you picked him up, how that happened and where you placed him?
Basically, what I did is when I entered the cell, I noticed Mr. Bruner was laying on the floor. He was curled up in a fetal position in what appeared to be a pile of trash. I can't remember what I said to him exactly. He didn't respond back. I picked him up and I placed him on his bunk, kind of like you would if you did a child that was sleeping, and he was laying on his side.
Was he unconscious?
I can't remember, but I don't think he was unconscious. No, I don't think he was.
Was he, as you picked him up, dead weight?
He was trying, but he wasn't. It wasn't much effort at all. He was pretty much almost dead weight, yeah.
And when you laid him on the bunk and left, and I think I got down on the floor to try to demonstrate it, I'm not sure if you could see it or not from where you were seated, was he seated, rolled over, as he was found by the nurses then a little bit later?
No, sir.
He was laying on his side.
Correct.
Now, you then went and visited with Mary Staton.
Correct.
And we'll talk to you about that in a little greater detail. But when you left Mary Staton, was it your understanding that something was going to be done for Mr. Bruner and done quickly?
Yes.
You completed a report, which is in Plaintiff's Exhibit 2. And in that report, you indicate that Mr. Bruner was laying on the floor in a pile of trash, curled up in the fetal position. What is the pile of trash that you remember?
I can't remember exactly what it was that was on the floor. It was a bunch of papers that was on the floor. As far as what that pertained, I'm not sure.
Now, you have today and you last Friday have said there are times where you don't have a clear memory of what happened 4 years ago, right?
Correct.
And it would be untruthful then for you to say with certainty this happened or this didn't happen if you don't have a clear memory, right?
I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, you're trying to be truthful when you say that there are instances where you don't have a clear memory of what happened some 4 years ago, right?
Correct.
The report, however, was prepared, on March 11, 2008?
Yes, sir.
So that would have been the day after your observations on March 10, 2008.
Correct.
And the report does not mention vomit, does not mention soiled linen, does not mention, well, it doesn't mention those two things, does it?
No, sir.
On March 11, 2008, if you had made observations in addition to a pile of trash on the floor, that is, observations of vomit on the floor, observations of soiled linen, would that have been something that you would have found important to include in your report?
Yes, sir.
Can we infer from your practice and from your training that the fact it mentions neither vomit nor soiled clothing would indicate that at least as of March 11, 2008, you did not have any memory of observing those in the cell?
Correct.
That's something, that cell, we don't have really a very good inside picture of it, but if you've got vomit all over the floor or if you've got soiled clothing, is that something that you could have overlooked?
It's possible, but I don't remember whether it was there or not.
Okay. Now, the daily activity log, I'll talk to you about that. Again, you were the rover on March 10 responsible for 4 different pods, is that right?
Yes, sir.
The pod 1, the daily activity log, which is 403, exhibit 403, shows a head count of 39 inmates, 39 on the locator for that pod. So that would indicate what, sir?
That indicates that there's a total of 39 inmates in that pod that we are accountable for during that shift.
Okay, so you've got the 39 there, and then you've got the 3 other pods that could have up to 50 inmates, and that were part of your responsibility on March 10.
Yes, sir.
The log shows that on 7/21, deputies are in pod with linen, and at 7:52, deputies are out of pod with linen. So it would have been sometime between 7:21 and 7:52 that you would have had your contact with Mr. Bruner.
Correct.
And that would have been, to your knowledge, the first contact that you had with him when he was in jail on that occasion.
Correct.
And in your report, you describe that contact. You say you and Deputy Murphy went over to inmate Bruner and helped him walk into the cell. Now, you've described that, and if I correct in understanding that simply the two of you went over there, told him, look, to the words to the effect, you need to get in your cell, Mr. Bruner, and then kind of he walked slowly into his cell, and that was the sum and total of your observations of Mr. Bruner at that time?
Yes, sir.
And you noted he was acting very strange and moving very slow, and you described the strange behavior as being someone that appeared to you to be like so many other inmates in there, unfortunately, maybe someone who has a mental health issue. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Now, Deputy Murphy thought that that whole process took about 30 seconds. Is that too long, too short? How long was your observation with Mr. Bruner on that occasion?
It was fairly short.
Are you comfortable with his estimate of about 30 seconds?
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, that'd be right, about right, somewhere around there.
The distance that Mr. Bruner had to travel, get into his cell when you saw him was what, about the same distance that you and I are separated? A little bit further, a little bit closer?
Probably maybe just a tad bit further, not too much. Yeah, oh,
Here?
yeah, that's about right, yes, sir.
You went back and you talked to Mary Staton, or you and Mr. Murphy did briefly before you went back to the linen exchange. Is that correct? Or do you remember?
I don't remember.
And the linen exchange is located in the gym, right?
Yes, sir.
And being in the gym, it's not in the area where the inmates are housed, correct?
No, sir.
Now, the linen exchange, without spending too much time on it, is a kind of a rotating process where inmates come in and leave from the rover's perspective. Is that right?
Correct.
So you may have inmates that are coming from the mezzanine level, you may have inmates coming from the ground level, but they're coming in groups, not all in one major enterprise. Is that right?
Correct.
When you went and put Mr. Bruner back in his cell and spent maybe 30 seconds with him, were there other inmates actually out, or had they all returned to their cells?
There may have been a few that were still trying to make their way back to their cells, but as far as the day room, it was pretty much empty just about.
Okay, so there may have been a few inmates that were headed back probably to the cells around the area that Mr. Bruner was in, possibly because that would have been the grouping that had been released to go deliver their or swap out their linens. Would that be the normal procedure?
Right. You
Okay.
you would typically have sections, so yeah,
Okay.
that'd be
By
sections that you'd let out.
By contrast, you would not, if normal procedures are followed, you would not expect inmates to be out that are housed up in the mezzanine area at that time, because they'd either be in their cell waiting to get the linen, or maybe they'd already made their linen swap, right?
Well, it depends on how you're doing it.
Now, this is page 22 of 26 of Exhibit 402. We go to the next page in the log, page 23 of this printout. There is a reference at 904 where it says clinic and RV1 in pod with meds. What does that mean, sir?
That means they're conducting med pass. Clinic is usually, I'm assuming she was referring to the med passer, and Rover 1 South would be the rover for the pod, and they've entered the pod with their medications.
And you were the RV1 at that time, right?
Yes, sir.
Exhibit 415 is the diagram of the pod, and where on this exhibit would you have been as part of the med pass? And I'm going to try to speed this along. Would it have been over where, about in this door where it says S148A?
Yes, sir.
And you would have been with a clinic med pass or med aid at that point, Anybody else with you as you were passing out the meds?
Not that I remember, no.
Let me show you what is one of the photographs in Exhibit 114. Is that the hallway that you would have been in with the med aid as the med pass took place?
Correct.
And so you actually don't go into the common area or the day room as part of the med pass, do you?
Well, unless you have someone that's on lockdown, that's when you would go in there and give them their meds.
But if there's no one getting meds on lockdown, what's the procedure as far as how the inmates receive the medications and where you are when the medications are disseminated?
You have the pod deputy will have the inmates line up at the section door, and then what happens is the rover...
Section door is this door here, the inside of it?
Correct. Yeah. And then the rover basically holds that door while the inmates come out and take their medications.
Now, if there's no evidence that Mr. Bruner received medications as part of the med pass, you wouldn't have seen him then when you were in the cell. Probably you would not have seen him when you were in the cell for the med pass. Is that correct?
Correct.
Additionally, if he stayed in his cell and didn't come out when the med pass took place, then you wouldn't have, it's clear that you wouldn't have seen him. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, the log works down, and the next entry of note where there is an RV1 is at 1026. It says RV1's in pod, and that's at 1025. Sergeant Martinez is in the pod. And then there's an entry at 1028 saying deputy out of the pod for break. Put that in English for us. What does all that mean?
From what I'm looking at, it looks like the sergeant, typically your sergeant makes rounds to the pods just to check with your deputies, make sure they don't need anything and to see how things are going. And that's what it looks like what's going on here at about 1025. And then I came in right behind him to give the pod deputy a break.
So when you're giving a break, where are you stationed in the pod?
You take over the booth for the pod deputy while she leaves the pod.
And again, the photograph that we were looking at a few minutes ago from 414, that's kind of the back end of the booth, is that right?
That would actually be the front as you're walking in down the sally port.
And this photograph in 414, what is it?
That's inside the deputy's booth.
And the photograph in 414 showing here, what is that?
That's going to show the side of the deputy's booth in actual section C.
Part of the exhibit as well is this photograph. What is it?
That's further back in section C.
When you are giving a deputy a break, can you leave that booth?
No, sir.
From that booth, can you see an inmate who is laying down in a cell?
No.
In that booth, can you hear inmates?
Only if they're yelling.
Would you hear an inmate who is in their cell with their cell door closed, coughing or vomiting?
No, sir.
Now, the exhibit 402, the log goes on to page 24 of this particular printout. And it shows that RV1's out of pod at 10:58. So the break that you had provided was for what, about 30 minutes?
Yes, sir.
And that's the only break that you would provide for the pod deputy that day, is that correct?
Correct.
And you're providing breaks to the 3 other pod deputies that you are dealing with that day,
Correct.
in addition to your other duties.
Correct.
Now, this indicates that RV1's in pod with I am right 115M at 11:08. What does that mean?
That means I was escorting an inmate into the pod.
So you'd left the pod at 10:58 and then apparently brought an inmate back at 11:08 and spent a minute in when you left the pod again at 11:09. Is that right?
Correct.
When you bring an inmate into the pod, do you just drop him off? What's the process as far as delivering an inmate to a pod?
If they're in red, which if I'm thinking of the inmate right, I'm pretty sure that was a guy that was in red. Basically, you bring him in to the pod, take the shackles off, because people that wear red jumpsuits have to wear shackles when they walk around the building. After that, you would hand the shackles back to the pod deputy, and that's pretty much the procedure.
115M would be a mezzanine level, right? That's second floor?
Yes, sir.
And in Exhibit 415, I don't have the mezzanine. Actually, we have it right here. That's the mezzanine level. So this is not really the level that you're currently on. It's one level down. It's on the ground floor.
Correct.
The inmate that was returned was 115M. So that would have been over here. Do you see that over here?
It's in that area, yeah. Yes. Yes.
That's in the same section C. Would you have, when you returned that inmate, traveled over and been by Mr. Bruner's cell, which is underneath this 124?
No, sir. You don't even go into the actual section. Yeah, you stay in the sally port.
Just let him in that door that we just looked at.
Correct.
Then the log goes on and shows at 11:51 serving chow, RV1 in pod at 11:53, and at 12:06 finished serving chow. What was your role as far as the serving of chow on that occasion?
You come into the pod. The trustees are the ones that are going to serve the chow trays to the people in the sections. What you're doing is you're basically monitoring what's going on. The pod deputy will have the section come out and have a seat. The rover actually will call tables one by one to come eat. And while that's going on, you're trying to make sure no one's stealing anything or any other activities are going on that's not supposed to at that time.
Are you in the pod when the chow goes on?
Do you mean in the section?
In the section.
Yes.
Now, there are 3 sections. This is the first floor here. Would you be in during this time period in each one of the sections during chow?
Correct.
Now, during the time you're in the sections and you're observing the inmates eating, do you also make observations of inmates that are in their cells?
Not necessarily, unless you have someone that's on lockdown. You have to actually feed them at their door.
Do you have any memory or belief that you would have looked at and into the cell with Terry Bruner during chow?
I honestly don't remember.
There's been testimony that an effort was made to see whether Mr. Bruner had actually eaten his food. Would you leave, however, the cell before chow is completed, or when do you leave?
Once all the inmates have received a chow tray, you secure whichever section you serve last, you secure the door, and that's pretty much the end of chow service. So it's your belief that you weren't involved in trying to monitor whether or not Mr. Bruner had eaten on 310? I don't believe so, no.
Now, the next entry with an RV on it is at a roughly 1:30, clinic in RV1 in pod with meds. So now that's just a repeat of what we talked about before, where you stay out in the Sally Port area, right? The hallway.
Right.
And again, you would not have seen Mr. Bruner then on 1:30 unless he was someone receiving medications. We have no evidence that he was.
Correct.
Then at 2:11, there's an entry that RV1's in pod checking on inmate Terry Bruner, 124. And that's then when you went in and saw Mr. Bruner laying on the floor in the fetal position, the trash that we discussed.
Yes, sir.
The log goes on to say that at 3 minutes after you got there, that racked pod for shift change. What does that mean?
At 2:30, I believe, is when you send everybody in their cells for shift change, and that's the time. It gives the time for the pod deputy to get the paperwork ready and get everything ready to brief the next shift.
So that would indicate then that all the inmates as of 2:14 were sent into their cells and the cell doors were locked behind them as part of that shift change procedure.
Correct, except for there's a pod worker in each section that stays out to clean the section.
Okay. And the pod workers are identified at the beginning of the exhibit that day, Mr. Fish and Mr. I'm going to mispronounce his name, Ogunbayi, I think it is. Is that right? Okay.
Correct.
Then it shows at 2:24, RV1 out of pod with IM Naputi to Provis. To begin with, the RV1's you, right?
Correct.
And it says you're now out of the pod with an inmate. What is Provis?
It's professional visitations where attorneys go to meet with inmates to speak with them about their case and things like that.
So you escorted an inmate to go see his attorney for the purpose of his case and left at 2:24.
Correct.
Now, it says you're in at 2:11, and then it says that you're taking an inmate to a professional visit at 2:24. Would that indicate one way or the other how long, or whether you've been in the cell or the pod area for 10 minutes, or is it possible that, well, let me rephrase the question. Knowing that you transported an inmate to professional visit at 2:24, does that tell us when you left after you placed Terry Bruner on the bunk?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing the bottom part
Screen?
of the log.
No,
Yeah.
that's because I've moved it, haven't I? Looks plain to me. There we go. Okay. At 2:11, you're in the pod checking on Mr. Bruner. At 2:24, you're out of the pod with the inmate to the professional visit that we've discussed. What I'm trying to get a handle on is, does this mean that you were in the pod with Mr. Bruner for 13 minutes, or does it indicate one way or the other?
Looking at this, I may not have been actually physically dealing with him for that whole time. I may have dealt with him initially, and then after that, it's possible I could have been waiting on the amputee to get ready for pro visit.
Do you have any memory as to how long a period of time you spent in the pod cell with Mr. Bruner after 2:11?
It wasn't very long at all. I don't know an exact. Are you wanting like an exact number? Or?
I'm wanting your best estimate as to how much time you spent with Mr. Bruner at or immediately after 2:11.
I'm not sure.
It's whatever time it took you to go in the cell to kind of assess his condition and put him back up on his bunk. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. It wasn't very long at all. I mean, I went in there, observed what I saw, and then helped pick him up and place him on his bunk. And that was pretty much it, because I needed to let her know what I just saw in the cell. So.
Are we talking about another 30 seconds to a minute?
Correct.
Then the next entry, page 25 of the exhibit, starts out second shift in pod at 2:53. After you left the pod with the inmate for professional visit, there's no indication you were back in the pod again until the end of shift. Do you have any memory of returning to the pod?
No.
So your contact with Mr. Bruner that we were able to document and that you're able to remember on March 10 was for about 30 seconds, sometime around 7:30, and for maybe 30 seconds or a minute sometime the afternoon of March 10. Is that accurate?
Correct.
You were asked what you had done to try to help Mr. Bruner by counsel. And you answered that in the morning that you personally did nothing. Now, that's accurate, isn't it?
Correct.
Now, on the other hand, you are a part of a team of deputies that operate the jail, is that right?
Correct.
And you knew when you left on that morning that the information that you had available to you for that 30 seconds or maybe a minute observation of Mr. Bruner, Mary Staton had, and you anticipated that she would be handling it, isn't that right?
Correct.
And you have some memory, don't you, somewhat vaguely, of discussions of Mr. Bruner with Sergeant Martinez around 10:25, 10:30 that morning, don't you?
I remember speaking with him, but I don't remember about what time it was.
Okay. And in that discussion, you understood that there was thought that what we need to do is have Mr. Bruner seen by mental health.
Correct.
So part of the team now included Sergeant Martinez, and as you folks sized up the situation, you were trying to get help to Mr. Bruner to have him seen by mental health, right?
Correct.
And that's what you felt was appropriate based on your observations of Mr. Bruner at that time.
Correct.
Did you lie to Sergeant Martinez about Mr. Bruner's condition when you were with him?
No, sir.
Did you intentionally withhold information from Sergeant Martinez?
No, sir.
And then that afternoon, it was the next time apparently you saw Mr. Bruner again for maybe 30 seconds or a minute, minute and a half. And at that time, you went and visited with Mary Staton and told her essentially what you saw, right?
Correct.
You don't remember the exact words.
No.
It'd be 4 years ago, and for you to try to say that you knew the exact words, you'd have to lie, right?
Correct.
But you understood then, after you communicated that information, that again, this team of Ms. Staton, Sergeant Martinez, they were going to do something to address Mr. Bruner's condition. Is that right?
Correct.
And then you, having performed your responsibilities, went out and performed other responsibilities that day. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I don't have any other questions. Thanks.
Redirect.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Jameson, again.
Good morning.
I'm going to follow up on things that you've been testifying to. So, I want to make it clear. Do you understand that under the Constitution of the United States, you have a responsibility not to betray Mr. Bruner, regardless of other people? Do you understand that it's non-delegable, I guess? I don't want to be too technical, but you have an individual responsibility, regardless of what other people do or don't do. Do you understand that?
Your Honor, I think he's trying to instruct or ask the witness to testify on a matter that really is a matter for the judge to instruct the jury on, and I don't really understand what exactly he's asking to say, but I don't think it's a proper subject for this witness.
Well, I'm following up on what he was trying to say about this team. He expected some team to do it rather than himself, Judge. It's exactly the inverse of what Mr. Chalmers was just discussing.
I think that's, I think you're both right. I think this does touch on a matter on which the court will give the jury instructions regarding the law, but because of plaintiff's punitive damage claim, I think it's also appropriate to get into his state of mind.
Thank you. You understand that you have an individual responsibility.
Yes, sir.
Are you blaming others for not doing anything?
No, sir.
So, how does the fact that nobody else did anything, what does that have to do with your job to do something about it?
I believe that I was doing what I was supposed to do as far as from what I saw.
So you didn't understand that you have a job, an individual responsibility to get him help, and not simply to walk away and say to somebody else, as you claim, he's not well? You didn't understand you have your own responsibility?
Well, when you speak with the pod deputy, they're ultimately in charge of what goes on. They're in charge of making the calls to people to get people help and those type of things, unless it's something where you have to call an actual code. And I felt that me telling her what was going on, and I was under the impression that it was being taken care of, that was the end of it.
Well, you actually said it. If it's a situation of life or death, you have to call an actual code. You're supposed to be doing it, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
You didn't do that, did you?
That's because it didn't appear to me that this was a life or death situation.
Something was going to be done, you claim, right?
I was under the impression that it was being taken care of, yes.
Was it going to be done quickly? Or was he going to lie there for an hour, or 2 hours, or 5 hours?
That would have been up to the people in mental health.
Well, people in mental health have testified in this case they didn't even know about it until 3 o'clock. And nobody called him and told him it was an emergency. So my question to you, was he going to lay there an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours?
That would have been up to mental health.
They didn't know about it. It's up to you, isn't it? I'm not arguing with you, but if they don't know about it, how could it be up to them? Strike that. You went in there at 2 o'clock. Did you call mental health?
No, I informed the pod deputy of what I saw.
Did Staton call mental health?
To my knowledge, I assume she was taking care of the issue.
When?
After we discussed what I saw in the cell.
When? How long did he lie there after you went in?
I don't understand your question. On the floor or on the bed?
In the condition he was in, whether he was on the floor or on the bed, how long did he continue to lie there after you observed him in the condition he was in?
Until the people that came down to see him, I'm assuming.
Right. Is this an example, by the way, of how you treat a human being?
I don't understand your question.
Is the way you treated Mr. Bruner, you understood he was housed in the jail for the crime of drunk driving, right?
I don't check people's charges unless they ask me to.
Okay. Is this an example, the way you treated him, an example of the way you treat human beings? Yourself, you, in that jail.
No, sir.
So this is an exception.
No, I don't understand what you're asking exactly.
You knew, did you not, that Mr. Bruner was ill?
I knew something wasn't right. I didn't know what it was exactly.
Haven't you testified under oath that you knew he was ill?
As far as ill as a medical problem, or?
Well, you're not a doctor. You knew he wasn't well. You didn't know what it was.
That's what I just said. I knew he had a problem. I didn't know what the deal
And
was.
you knew it, right?
I knew something wasn't right. I didn't know what it was.
Right. But and you didn't think it was, you knew it was in some way a sickness, right?
He appeared to have a mental health issue. That's what it looked like.
And you knew he needed help, didn't you?
There was no way of me knowing if he had already received treatment for that, because from what I was seeing was mental health.
Do you remember testifying under oath in this case?
Yes, sir.
Is this on? There we go. Do you remember being asked at page 89, did you think there was something wrong with him? And your answer was, I knew there was something wrong with him, but I didn't know if it was a mental issue or a physical issue, right?
Correct.
I didn't know exactly. All I knew was he needed someone to come and look at him.
Correct.
And you did nothing to get somebody to come and look at him, did you?
I notified the pod deputy to do that.
What did she do?
To my knowledge, she was taking care of it.
What did she do?
I don't remember. Are you saying after I told her what was going on?
Right. What did she do?
She contacted our sergeant and let him know.
What? He didn't know he was found laying on the ground. You've heard from your sergeant.
Is that a question?
Yes, you've heard from Mr. Martinez. He didn't know.
Okay.
Ron, I'm not sure that is what Mr. Martinez said, and I don't think it's proper to have him comment on another witness's testimony.
Are you claiming Mr. I'll restate the question, right? You claiming Mr. Martinez knew you found him laying on the ground and curled up in a fetal position?
I don't know exactly what he's. I don't understand what you're saying.
In addition to you knowing, you saw him in the morning at 7 o'clock, and even though you saw him walking around in a daze, confused, he couldn't make it even back into his cell without you directing him, you claim you never bothered to look at him or check up on him again. You just locked him in the cell and left him there as far as you're concerned.
At that point, there was no need for us to, because that wasn't anything that was abnormal.
I see. Everybody in the cell is just walking around confused, dazed, unable to talk, and needs help getting back into their cell. That's just a normal thing for a human being, right?
That's not anything strange that's in a jail setting, though.
And in addition to you seeing the things you saw, Staton was telling you something was wrong, right?
She asked us to help put him in his room.
And other inmates were telling you constantly something is wrong, right?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
There may have been people, there was people out during that time, but they were all heading in their rooms.
Do you remember testifying, page 89 again, under oath? What were the other inmates saying? Were you asking around to see if anybody observed what had happened? No, they were basically telling me what I'd already figured out on my own, that something was wrong. And what were they telling you? That something was wrong, that we needed to check on him because something was wrong with him. Isn't that what you testified to? So they were telling you, right?
I don't remember this part of it at all.
You don't remember testifying to that under oath? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
No.
And you knew that someone qualified needed to come and see him immediately, right?
Right.
And yet you did nothing to make that happen. So he laid there. Correct?
Are you talking the second time I dealt with him?
Yes. Both times I understand in your testimony with Mr. Chalmers, you observed these things, that you knew something was wrong, and you walked away. You spent as little time as 30 seconds, you said, and you just walked away. Right?
The first dealing with him did not appear. There was an immediate issue. He was acting strange, and but that wasn't something that was out of the norm in that setting. I mean, we have a lot of people in there that suffer from mental health issues.
Are you claiming mental health issues don't get treatment in your...
That's, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I did, maybe interrupted you. Are you claiming that you don't provide mental health treatment?
No, what I'm saying is if it's a mental health issue, people may not, that work in mental health may not just drop everything and come running down there immediately to see what's going on.
Well, nothing was, you saw him at 7 o'clock in the morning. Nobody did anything. You didn't do anything for him. Or call mental health, I should say, did you?
No, because that wasn't, I mean, it was strange behavior, but that was not something that's not uncommon there.
And you also claim that the pod deputy withheld from you information about him not eating.
I don't remember, but I don't recall.
If you had known, for instance, he wasn't eating, you've testified under oath, that would have been an emergency enough to call emergency medical care right there.
Excuse me, that calls for a hypothetical question. It doesn't get to his observations or his behavior. It's not a proper question. I object. It's irrelevant.
I don't know. My question was, he's testified under oath that if he had been told by Staton...
Your Honor, maybe we ought to approach, because I have really a concern about the approach the counsel's taking.
Okay.
Continue. You've testified under oath that defendant Staton did not tell you he had not been eating for 2 or 3 days.
Just to preserve my objection, Your Honor, I think it's an improper opinion testimony.
Okay,
Go.
well, this particular question is not opinion, so.
Just foundational. You testified to that, right?
That what?
That you weren't, you didn't have any knowledge he hadn't been eating.
To my knowledge, no.
If you had knowledge that he hadn't eaten for 2 or 3 days, as far as you're concerned, that's a medical emergency.
That really is the one I need to preserve the objection to, Your Honor. I apologize.
Thank you. Go ahead. You consider that a medical emergency, right?
Well, it depends on the situation.
What does it depend on?
If someone's not eating, I mean,
Right.
we can't make them eat. If they're eating commissary and they're not eating in the day room, we have no way of knowing if they're eating in the room. I mean, people go on hunger strikes, things like that all the time. It's not, I mean, that would be something that you would need to, watch, but I wouldn't,
What do you mean watch?
as far as if they didn't eat breakfast, you'd probably want to watch to check to see if they ate that next shift to make sure they're not doing things like that.
Do you recall testifying under oath? If you knew he had not eaten for 3 or 4 days, would you be concerned that this person would have a serious medical issue going on, correct? And your answer was, that would be something that would get my attention, yes. Did you testify to that?
For my benefit, counsel, what page is that?
Sure, that's page 64 and 65. Would you be concerned that this person would have a serious medical issue going on? The previous page says, if they hadn't eaten for 3 or 4 days, and you said, that would be something that would get my attention, yes.
That's why I said you would need to monitor their next meal.
Okay. And did you know the next meal for Mr. Bruner was monitored? That was lunch, and he didn't eat it, and he still didn't get medical attention?
Well, this is what, I'm sorry, this is the, Mr. Bruner, I have no idea from me dealing with him, there's no way of knowing if someone's hasn't eaten the past 4 days if you're a rover. Usually that information's passed on to the pod deputy.
So if a pod deputy knows that somebody hasn't eaten and they're not eating, that's obviously a medical emergency in your experience.
Same objections, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
If the pod deputy knows that, that he hasn't been eating for 3 days, you would need to contact your supervisor and let them know what's going on. That's definitely going to raise some concern if somebody's not eating, yeah.
You covered with Mr. Chalmers your experience, your time with him. Apparently, you found a man laying on the floor in trash, in a fetal position who wasn't responsive, and you picked him up like dead weight and put him on a bed and got out of there.
Is that a question? I'm sorry.
That's what you testified to just a short time ago.
Right.
I think you said 30 seconds or less.
And then I went and let the pod deputy know what was going on.
Did you check his vital signs? See if he was...
We're not required to do that.
Did you ask him whether he needed help?
He wasn't talking. I can't remember what I asked him when I first went into that cell, but he wasn't saying anything.
Well, you say he wasn't talking. Did you ask him? You apparently weren't talking either. Is that correct?
I can't remember what I said to him when I first went in there when I seen him laying on the floor, but he wasn't speaking.
Were you speaking?
As far as asking more questions, I don't know I can't remember what I asked him. That's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry, are you done?
Yes, sir.
Before you went in there, other inmates had told you he needed help, right?
Right. So
So you go in there, find a man on the floor, you lift him up, and you don't ask him any questions to see if he can respond?
I just said I can't remember what I said to Mr. Bruner, but he wasn't saying anything at all.
Tell us why you wouldn't ask him how he was, if you cared. Tell us why you wouldn't.
Wouldn't ask him questions?
Right.
I never said I didn't. I just said I don't remember what I said to him, but he wasn't responding back to me.
Okay. Well, so in that 30 seconds, you took the time to talk with him and realized he couldn't respond back to you at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
You can do all that while you're, dealing with the individual. You don't have to stand there and talk with him first before you.
And to be clear, so everything that you knew, Staton knew, right?
To my knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recross.
Now, counsel says to you that when you saw Mr. Bruner both in the morning and then when you saw him at 2:11 in the afternoon, that nobody was doing anything for him. And that's just dead wrong, isn't it?
Correct.
Because things were being done for him. Mental health was being arranged to come in and see him, right?
From what I'd spoken with the pod deputy and things like that, it was to my knowledge they were working on getting him someone to see him, yes.
Now, when counsel says that this was a life and death situation, was there anything you saw on March 10 in the morning first that appeared to be a life and death situation for Mr. Bruner?
No, sir.
Even in the afternoon, when you picked him up and put him on his bunk, on his side, was it, from your observation, a life or death situation?
No, sir.
You did not call a code 1.
No.
And why is that?
Because it didn't appear to be an emergency situation.
There's no bleeding,
Not
no evidence of any pain, no difficulty in breathing.
Correct.
What you saw was an individual who was non-responsive, who seemed to be a little worse, well, was worse than that morning, but was not an emergency situation, right?
Correct.
Now, counsel says you were told by inmates about this condition, and he references part of your deposition transcript. And he reads from the top part and the bottom part, but I want to focus on this. When you talked about you knew there was something wrong with him, but didn't know if it was a mental health issue, didn't know exactly. All I knew is someone needed to come look at him. This was shortly after 2, right? That's what you're saying.
Correct. Correct.
That was when you went to Staton and said he's not doing well, and you understood that they were doing something to get him seen at that time, right?
Correct.
Then, when he talks about inmates saying, again, this would have been shortly after 2. This is when you are at 2:11, actually, going into the cell and inmates are telling things. You go in and you make the same observations, right?
Correct.
You're not saying that inmates were telling you at 7:20 or 7:15 or whenever you saw him that at that point Mr. Bruner was in trouble. You don't have any memory of that at all, do you?
No, sir.
Now, counsel says, well, if 7 o'clock in the morning you had been told by Ms. Staton, by Mary, that this inmate hadn't been eating for 2 or 3 days, what would you have thought? You answered those questions. You have no reason to think that Mary knew as of 7, when you and Mr. Murphy first went in and returned the inmate to his cell, anything about Mr. Bruner's eating habits, did you?
No, sir.
You were asked whether this is an example of how you treat a human being. And you're not ashamed of what you did here, are you?
No, sir.
I mean, you looked at the guy, you reported the information, and thought that was helping him, right?
Correct.
When you say this is an exception, it's an exception because this is a case where, well, frankly, he was seriously ill, but you just weren't aware of it, right?
Correct.
And lastly, in one of the questions that counsel asks, he says when you picked Mr. Bruner up at around 2:11 or shortly after that, he was like dead weight. I thought you said it wasn't dead weight. I thought you said he kind of helped.
Yeah,
Tell us again what the circumstance was there.
I mean, when you picked him up, he was trying to help me help him pick him up, but he just was too weak. He couldn't do anything.
So this was not a man that was unconscious. This was not a man that was obviously in pain. He was a man that just seemed to be out of it, and that was consistent, unfortunately, with your experiences with some inmates as mental health issues.
Correct.
Even then, right?
Correct.
Even though you didn't know, well, maybe it could be something else, he just needed to be seen.
Correct.
I don't have any other questions.
Any redirect?
Just a couple. You didn't know or even have any knowledge of Sergeant Martinez being contacted. You never spoke to Staton about that, did you?
What time? You
Any
lost me.
time. You didn't know about Sergeant Martinez, did you?
As far as what? I'm having.
As far as
trouble.
supposedly being contacted that you're testifying now, that was not something that you were discussing at the time.
During what time of the day?
The whole day. Say at 2 o'clock when you find him lying there. You didn't contact Sergeant Martinez, did you?
No, that was the pod deputy. That was.
You didn't tell her to contact him, did you?
She had already let me know that he was contacted.
She did.
With
When
the-
did she do that?
I was under the impression that she was taking care of that, and between her and Sergeant Martinez, they were working things out.
When
with each other.
did you gain the impression that she had when did she tell you she had contacted Martinez?
Sergeant Martinez and myself and Deputy Staton were actually in a pod together at one point in time.
Talking about Mr. Bruner. Why didn't you tell us about that?
It was on the log.
Oh, and what time was that?
I don't know, that would have been about 10 something.
10 o'clock, and he continued to get worse and lie there. From 10 o'clock until you found him at 2 o'clock, right? Strike that. What were you waiting for? Strike that. At 2 o'clock, did you ask Staton, we talked about this at 10 o'clock. He's getting worse. Why hasn't anybody been in here?
Did I ask her that?
Yeah.
No, sir.
Now, do you recall, finally, you said you didn't know he'd been eating? He hadn't been eating? Is that your testimony now here in this court?
I don't remember if anyone actually told me, but as a rover, you wouldn't know that unless the pod deputy said something.
Well, I'd like to know, is it that no one told you or you don't remember whether somebody told you?
I don't remember.
Okay, so somebody could have told you, you just don't remember, right?
Correct.
Okay. No further.
Anything further?
I don't want to belabor the point, but we looked at in our examination when you came in and gave the break and when Sergeant Martinez was there and Staton was there on the log records, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And for anyone to suggest that this is something that's a surprise or different testimony than you provided before, that wouldn't be right, is it?
No, sir.
Right, nothing else.
Is that all?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jameson. You can step down.